Hello, and welcome to The Fool and the Philosopher.
The Philosopher and the Fool. I have had this conclusion about stances for quite a while, especially sword stances. Like, you hold long sword, you have your stance. Then I read a German text by, it's one of the more famous fighting texts from the, I think, 14th century. And of course, leave it to a 14th century German to lay out your thoughts about martial arts, which is, you look at the English books and they say, okay, these are sword stance, and you look at the Italians, and Italians are footwork, tons and tons of footwork. The Spanish have like different stances and footworks to move forward with. Then the Germans. There are 4 ways to hold the sword, and footwork involves moving forward, backwards, sideways, back and forth, and walking in a position that feels natural. And like, they have the 4 guards in German, and each guard is super literal. Like, the other ones have like the ox stance and the lady stance and the lord stance. Then the Germans are literal, like, this is what the stance looks like, sort of things. But anyways, I was reading some of the martial arts books by Peter Ralston, and he won a martial arts tournament back when they were still super scary. And he has some insights, and he goes along to spirituality, but if you go beyond the spirituality of his stuff and look at the basics, his stance is also stand what feels comfortable. However, you've been spending most of your life standing in a way that doesn't feel comfortable. So this is how to find the way to stand comfortable again. And what I sort of figured from that is he also talks a lot about using gravity and sinking, and he's like trying to get you to a point where you're going to have the best balance you can, the most solid stance where you can apply the most force. And then all martial arts, like karate, jiu-jitsu, all these with their various different stances, their various different ways of walking, is basically the originators of these martial arts figured out a thing that allowed them to stand in a way that gave them balance. And then they taught it to other people. But it was probably a lot of it comes from how it worked for them. And as we've talked about, people are very different. Like, you can't lift your pinky off the surface and various things. And so, but it's a lot easier to say, especially when you're passing on knowledge, oh, just stand like this instead, because each person has to figure out. It's very hard to look at someone's like, yeah, your stance isn't right, whereas you can go, well, this generally works for me, so this will generally work for you. Because when I was doing karate for the short while I did it, I was enjoying it quite a bit, but the way they stood infuriated me. It felt wrong to my legs, it felt wrong to all my different senses of martial arts I've learned and ways of standing. Even when I get into various different fights and duels and stuff with martial arts and sparring, I guess, it's like the karate stance was just not right. And I was thinking about it, well, it's not right for me. And so martial arts then comes very much to, you're going to figure out yourself to extents with the martial bit how stand. And these are guidances to help you get there. And where people mess up in the over-tradition of martial arts, because karate is like 600 years old. And of course it's revitalized, but still they try to fall back into the traditions of it. And it's basically like information loss over time. Like, if you record audio and then record that audio and record the audio, it slowly turns into static.
Except it's renewed every time, because people create their own story each time.
Yes.
But that means it can deviate to, like, a game of Chinese Whispers, where it becomes something that it wasn't.
Yeah, that's better, a game of Chinese Whispers, where it deviates instead of the information completely lost.
And I guess the obvious solution to that is just keep it simple.
Yeah.
And
so that's why I'm trying to think about with these teaching people is the basics, because I'm looking at these manuals and things. Start with the basics. Start with just standing and moving.
you know that what are wooden swords called in Japanese?
The
staffs.
The bow staffs, or
potentially the bamboo staffs.
The bamboo bundles.
Yeah.
I can't remember the name of them all. I usually do,
but that basic exercise where you just block and counter strike.
Yeah. That
teaches you most of the
the over the head, the block rotate, block rotate.
That teaches you a huge amount of sword fighting.
Kendo swords.
Kendo, yes. That teaches you a huge amount of sword fighting with just a very simple exercise.
Yeah.
Block left, block right, strike left, strike right, and strike overhead. Because you personally, if you do that enough, can start improvising from there.
Yeah.
I was trying to think, there's a musical term, right? Like with jazz, where you're given a chord. Yeah. Actually, this is something they do in music.
Jamming.
Yeah, they do quite well in music, actually.
Yeah.
They teach you basic chord structures, and then it's up to the player to play around within the chord structure.
Well, for a while with me and the one other guy who was in the club who was kind of on skill level with me, is I taught him all the basics I knew. I went through the basics with him. I gave him like footwork, the ideas, a bunch of theory. And then we just started sparring. And I basically pointed out, okay, this is my mistake here. This is your mistake here. And I was examining both our fighting while we're doing it. And so even though we're on equal levels of skill, he might even be better than me in some ways. He probably is. It was me taking initiative, okay, this is what you did wrong here. You need to be more aggressive here. You need to do this here. And sort of moving that forward. But then I was thinking about this with exercise as well. And we went over, I don't know if we went over on the podcast, but we talked about it, Atlas, his exercises.
Oh, like the...
That made a man out of Mac.
Yeah.
But his exercise theory.
Charles Atlas.
Yeah, is actually brilliant. Because it's exercise without weights, exercise without machines.
Just do it so that you're doing it.
Yeah, but also the Mr. Physio on YouTube, where he has those tension stretching, which is a lot of stretching is you take your ligament and you apply pressure against it with other body parts or use gravity and leverage to apply pressure. Whereas his is applying a slight amount of pressure and then applying your muscle resistance against that pressure. So you never overextend yourself, but it still gives you an equal amount of stretching and also actively works your muscles at the same time, loosening them. And so it was exhausting last night. I did a bit this morning, but last night I was basically trying to move every single muscle in my body, like get each muscle moving and try to stretch each different muscle, and without using anything besides gravity and myself.
There's an equivalent in sort of self-help, mental help, pop psychology, where people think you have to do something. You have to do this way. You have to do this. Yeah. But some of the best advice you can have for helping out with your mental health is go easy on yourself. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean don't do anything. That doesn't mean sit around despondently. It means let what happens happen.
Yeah.
And just go with it. And I think the same is very true of exercise, where there's people, it's like you have to do this very specific exercise, this very specific way, and they get injured.
Yeah.
Because you do it slightly wrong and you get injured, or you do it right, but the person that designed the exercise didn't know what they were doing, or their body was built slightly differently.
Yeah, well, so what I was trying to do with this is figuring out basically how can I warm people up. So this is what that was meant to be, is how I can warm people up. Because whenever, like, even the karate class, I was actually really disappointed in their warm-up routine. Like, oh, we're going to do this stretch. And you have a gym class, we're going to do these stretches. I was like, all the stretches they do are basically worthless for me. They might work for other people, but for me, they are worthless. And so I was thinking about, stretching, there's either two reasons we're doing it. One is to get our muscles warmed up, and the other is to, like, slightly loosen things. And so I was going, all right, I'm going to move my body to a point where I feel tension without pain. And then I'm going to flex the muscle there and move with it instead of, like, doing a prescribed, oh, this is this stretch that works here. So I was basically twisting myself and untwisting myself into knots.
So what you should do with stretching is, we're going to stretch our arms, we're going to stretch our legs. It's not get into this position.
Yeah.
It's, okay, we're going to stretch our quads. Mm-hmm. So this is a stretch, work within this realm. Yeah. Because they tend to work, but you have to figure it out on your own a little bit.
Well, so a thing I figured out while doing it, and I don't know how well this translates, but it's basically, this is a muscle warm-up thing, but also a stretching thing, is you start with your hands, and you put your hands into tension, and you find a point where they're strained. So you put your hands into tension, find a point where they're strained. And then once you get there, you work on that bit, but then because everything's linked, you'll figure out where in your forearms you're in tension when you are there. So then you move to your forearms, then you move into your biceps and your shoulders, and basically goes out through the rest of the body. And that's a hypnotist. It's kind of a reverse thing that people use for sleeping, like sleep hypnotism, but also just sleeping is you start with your head and you relax it. Then you slowly go down through your whole body and relax each part, or you start on your feet and you relax and you go up. And so you just relax, and you move up. And by relaxing one part, you can find out how to relax the next and move up through with it.
I think that also itself ties into the idea of don't be too hard on yourself. You don't have to do this exercise. You can just go to sleep. You don't have to follow this thing, relax your hand bit by bit by bit. Yeah. That's a lot of work. Yeah. That's exhausting, just mentally exhausting. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure if it's worth it. Like, if you enjoy doing it,
Yeah.
do it. But if you think I have to do this,
Yeah.
that's a different thing entirely. So you can have an example of, you say, oh, Wim Hof breathing, you got to do it twice a day, something like that. And you don't want to do it, but you're like, oh, I got to do it. It's to be healthy. 10 years down the line, we find out that it decays your telomeres or something, let's say. Yeah. And you were doing it for no purpose other than you thought you had to do it and you didn't like it the entire time.
Yeah.
So listen to yourself. It's quite remarkable, actually.
Yeah, well, that's the idea of even that tension exercise, just to start with, like going through those muscles, is to find the body's limitations once so you know where to work.
Right, but you don't even have to do that.
Yeah.
It's like the tension exercises in this circle, and I'm talking of a bigger circle of you don't need to learn your limits.
Yeah.
You already know them. You don't need to stretch. You're already doing as much stretching as you need to. And of course, a lot of people might not be, but we don't know if stretching is even good for you or bad for you. So if it feels good, do it. And if you enjoy it, do it. But don't feel like, okay, I've got to do this tension exercise once to figure out what my limits are to do it.
Well, it's also coming from the point of instructing people, right? So I'm trying to figure out how to go through an instruction routine and the structure behind it and the principles. Of course, I'm only using myself right now, and other people have different needs. And so I was like, do I generalize too much, or like, do I work on this? Like, because people go to something and they want to have structure because it's like, oh, just sort of stand about and be a wibbly wobbly blob. Then they have no reason to be in there. They want structure. That's why they went there. So trying to figure out a structure that will be helpful.
Sometimes they want the space to do something within.
Yeah.
So people go to the gym to lift weights. You can lift weights at home. You just pick up a heavy box and you put it down again. You can run at home. You don't have to go to a track or... And some places they have materials, like you can't rock climb at home. So you might go to the rock climbing place. You don't want to be given instructions. You just play around on the wall. Learn at your own pace. And sometimes you want to be with a bunch of like-minded people. Mm-hmm. And it's nice to have someone there that knows what they're doing. You can go to them and say, okay, so first it's warm up. So how do we warm up? And then you say, okay, well, you do this. But someone's like, I'm going to do my own warm up. And it's like, okay, I'm warming up.
Yeah.
And it's just a place to be. Yeah.
I mean, there's also context of the limited space that we have. So try and figure everything out. I mean, I don't know what I'm doing.
There's, this is taken almost wholesale from Sam Vankin, but applying it to this. Yeah. But there's an idea of closure where people think you need to have closure with something. So there's an abusive parent, let's say. Yeah. So you have to confront them about the abuse. Or let's say that abusive parent has died. Yeah. And you're still angry at them. And so there's this exercise of...
Screaming out their gravestone.
Yeah. Or the empty chair. Yeah. Where you imagine them sitting in a chair across from you. Yeah. Like a chair in your room, let's say. And you say what you need to say. You do what you need to do. You can even, let's say, imagine the situation where they're abusing you, and this time you stand up and you get closure. And there's whole fields of self-help about closure. Do this closure exercise, do this. You need to talk to this person just to get the answer. You have to ask them, why did you break up with me? Just so you have closure. All these things. And apparently, now I haven't verified this myself, but it rings true with what I know from my own life. But this and from extrapolations from the psychological stuff I've read. Yeah. But apparently the literature on closure is that it's very calming in the moment to do these exercises. It makes you feel good for a moment. It's cathartic. And it basically erodes your resilience because things don't end. Yeah. Things go on and on and on forever. And the way to overcome that, it's not really it's like life throws weights on your back. Yeah. And closure is telling you to put down the weights. But in reality, you just need to work out more, get stronger. You need to get stronger without injuring yourself. Yeah. Without falling by the wayside. So resilience is the only way sort of for that, for the most part that we're aware of. Things don't just neatly end. And so there's this idea of, there's people, they'll seek closure. They'll constantly go to the next thing. This will give me the release. This will give me the release. This will give me the release. And it's constantly seeking the correct way. Now I will know how to be a runner. Now I will know how to be a runner. Yeah. I've read 20 books on how to be a marathoner. I'm ready to go. And then there's some guy that's just been out, day one, he was just flailing out on the pavement, didn't read a single book, and a year later he's 10 times as good as me because I was just reading all the theory, not ready to start.
Yeah. Well, so one thing I should say about this, because you're saying like it's a space people want to go there, whatever. One of the things that I say why I'm looking into this stuff is I don't know what I'm doing exactly with it, but I do know I want to teach, and I've always wanted to teach what little I know of the thing, because I think I have some insights that could be useful.
Yeah.
And so I want to go through and teach these things and go through those basics.
Yeah, I'm not saying you shouldn't do anything.
Yeah.
You shouldn't lie back there. I guess I'm going more on the line of Orpheus. Orpheus knew the path out of the underworld.
Yeah.
And he walked it, and his wife Eurydice followed him.
Yeah.
So that was the
guidance.
The guidance right there was, look, this is how you do it. You'll figure it out. Like, okay, we're gonna stretch legs.
Yeah.
Someone's like, you see someone like biting on their thumb. You're like, okay, we want to focus more on the thing with the big knobbly bit in the center.
Yeah.
And then they're like, okay. And then someone says, okay, I don't know how to get my calf. And you're like, oh well, this works for me. You do this, you do this. And then someone says, stretching makes my ears hurt. You're like, okay, we'll figure something out. That's not right.
Yeah.
It's when the student is ready, the master will appear. You bring it into them, and
yeah, I think that works partly. Like Orpheus, definitely, I think that's a good thing. But also, well, yeah, I guess because the student will say, teach me how to do this. And then it's like, okay, I can teach you now. Then.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't make the assumption that people are showing up there to be taught by me. They're showing up there to hit other people with sticks.
yeah.
So
Someone comes, right, so lesson from Zen Master. Someone comes to your studio, and he says, hello, I would like to learn how to fight with a sword. And you say, who is there? He says, oh, my name's Sam. You just whack him over the head with a sword and say, go away. He comes back and he says, hello, I'd like to learn with the sword. Who are you? Sam? Hit him again.
Well, actually, do you know what's funny? I bought some materials to make my Halloween costume, and I realized that one of them I didn't need because I cut down a bunch of willow trees, and they look better than this wooden pole I bought. I'm looking at this wooden pole, and it's like slightly longer than a sword, so it's like one of those sort of perfect things for like just to hit someone in the calves with.
Just give them a
little tap.
Yeah, a little tap of enlightenment.
Yes.
Who's there? I don't know. Enter.
Well, a lot of Zen Buddhism comes from Japan. And you know in Smash Bros, that item that Link could get people locked in Infinite Combat?
Yeah, the fan.
Yeah, the fan. So that's the Japanese slapstick, that fan. It's the fold piece of paper that you tap someone with, and it doesn't have much force.
Yeah. Well, what was his name? Roku or Reek? The Japanese Zen master ended up killing the student. He beat him to death with one. Like
he was using a stick, not one of those fans.
Yeah, he's just really strong.
The point of those fans is it's meant to be like it doesn't actually apply force. It's a sting of paper slapping you.
Just get your attention.
Yeah, it's like rice paper. I just think they're kind of brilliant thing. Like there's the slapstick, which is a stick with holes in it, and it hits and it stings. But then they just have a paper fan, which makes a noise.
Yeah, it's funny.
Before that, so talking about Japan, they have those things there. One of the interesting openings in the German fight book that I was reading is, so this was by the English translator, there's a misconception when we talk about martial arts that it comes from the East and we imagine Asian martial arts and going through these things, and we think they're so much more developed in these art forms. Whereas if you go looking for it, there are thousands of recorded records of the medieval and European martial arts, and this is just about one of them. And its illustrations are beautiful from the plates. They're well thought out and well put through, and some of it's bizarre, but there's this giant shield that you wield with two hands, and it's got a pole going through the center of it, and on either side of the pole there's pointed tips, and it's like a dueling weapon. Both people have it, and you try to dip the shield around the other person's shield.
That's from the fight book.
Yeah, this is the fighting section of the fight book. Like the fight book has bizarre things in it, and then you have maces inside these shields, and if you disarm someone of their shield, you can take the mace out and start hitting them with it, or if both people disarm, then they start fighting with the maces and grappling. It's like, what on earth am I looking at?
Yeah, do you know if that's a dueling technique or if that's a real military device?
Ritual combat.
Yeah.
It's a ritual combat. I'm actually waiting for, what's his name? Todd from Todd's Workshop to make one of those and give it to Skullgrim. because he's doing a thing where he makes unusual weapons from the fight book and gives it to Skullgrim to try to figure out how to fight with them.
Mm.
And he gave him, it looks like a bike chain, no, a flail, but it's a bike chain instead of a normal chain with a mace end, and so it has to swing in only one direction. And that mace turned out to be way more useful than a flail that just has a loose chain. And actually, like, they figured out how to make it work, and they've made a bunch of bizarre weapons, so I'm waiting to see if he makes that one.
What do you think of the idea of an incomplete instruction manual? Now, obviously, for some things that doesn't work, like for a board game. Well, even a board game you could put... Okay, for a computer game it doesn't work because then the game doesn't run.
Yeah.
The code has to be complete. But for a board game or a role-playing game or a sport even, something like that, you don't cover all the errata. You leave room for interpretation of...
Well, then you get Family Monopoly.
But that didn't leave... Like, people weren't filling in blanks, they were adding on to it.
Yeah.
So, for example, I guess using Monopoly, you roll doubles while you're in prison and there's no rule for that. You're like, do I get to roll again still to try to get out or not?
Yeah.
Let's say there's not a rule for that. And then you as a family have to come up with a rule.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, there's the downside to that where you might choose a bad rule, but you do learn from it, even if it's bad. And then there's...
So...
It's hard to be a chess grandmaster unless you all agree on the rules.
Yes, but so with a sport, not a sport, but even like learning martial arts or instruction is going through something, it falls into the Chinese whispers of a structured instruction book of this is what you do, allows for no exploration. You do that and you only do that, and you master the craft as it is, and you never grow beyond what it was. However, if you allow for growth, if you allow for experimentation and you go through that, you can get something amazing and you can like expand further, or you can have your fist behind your back and be punching like from the groin basically, and thinking that that works.
But then someone will quickly show you otherwise.
Yeah, or you have the case of China of that guy beating up everyone with MMA because they don't.
So something that Magnus Carlsen does in chess, actually, his opening moves tend to be very suboptimal.
Yeah.
Because what he's trying to do is he's trying to leave book games as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Because that eliminates like 90% of master-ish level players.
Yeah, well, I did that as well. So in our math class, there was a guy who basically knew 4 openings and the book responses to a bunch of moves for like the first 3 turns of chess, which are the simplest to know. But basically, you don't do those first 3 turns, you go through these openings. You're going to beat everyone at chess who's at like a level that's pretty low. And so I would basically outlast him to where he no longer knew what to do by building those little triangles that you do with pawns. So I just created a defense and outlast him, and then it's like, I don't know. What do I do anymore? I don't know how to play.
So I think it's very hard because what you end up having then is a system where you don't teach every response to every action. You teach someone how to learn, which is much harder to do.
Yeah.
And it looks weird because someone comes to you and says, can you teach me how to swing a sword? Like, can you teach me how to sword fight? And you say like, oh, wax my fence, because that will give you the idea of motion. Or, okay, let's play a game of Go. And they're like, what? What's going on here?
Yeah, well, like a part of that, teach me how to fight with a sword. And the thing I might start with is push me over.
Yeah. Yeah, so...
Or don't get pushed over.
If you have footwork, leverage, and...
understanding the mechanic of striking.
Yeah, that's like 3-4 things you need to learn.
Yeah.
They could take a lifetime to master. And if you put that down in a book to teach future generations, that's not going to have a game of Chinese Whispers. It's very basic. It's stand right, hit right.
Yeah. And that's basically what The Art of Effortless Power is. That book is like the first 40 pages are how to stand so that you don't fall over.
And that's why in Karate Kid, that's what the guy does, is he says, okay, wax on, wax off.
Yeah, well, so Wing Chun...
He's teaching him like the 6 basic movements of your arms, basically.
Yeah. So Wing Chun, the martial arts that Ip Man used.
Yeah.
If you look at Ip Man's Wing Chun versus the Wing Chun that is taught now, and even the story of what happened to Ip Man when he went to the Chinese capital, Beijing. And I think it's Beijing, he's trying to get his own Wing Chun school. And all the other martial arts schools didn't let him make a school. And he had to challenge a bunch of them, and even then they didn't like it. They were all steeped in tradition. He was too, but they were steeped in tradition of that city. And he was a country martial artist, whereas they were city martial artists. And they had forms and traditions and these recognized things. And this stranger walks and was like, I want to start a martial arts school. It's like, you can't start a martial arts school. You have to learn our martial arts and do this, where he wanted to teach the Wing Chun to them, go through with his form martial arts. But if you look at someone practicing Wing Chun from his school versus someone practicing Wing Chun from a different school in China, you're going to find that his is a lot more boorish, a lot more brutal. Even though Wing Chun's called a women's self-defense art, his has this, I don't know, basic practicality to it of movement, joint, lock, break. Striking so that the person goes down instead of like trying to do a beautiful motion. His is just a motion. And he basically, through necessity, had to turn his Wing Chun into a weapon. And so if you're to learn a traditional Chinese martial arts, his school is one of the better ones to learn from, because he actually had to use it. He had to learn to use it to fight.
I wonder if there's a process I can imagine happening. I wonder if it's what happened in China. Because China is a very old culture. Yeah. And so they had time to think these things through. And so I'm sure at one point there was a sword master who came to his school and said, teach me to be a sword master, please. Yeah. He said, very well. Let's play a game of Go. Well, and wait, I'm not done the idea. And so the students it's like, what? This is crazy. But it's like, no, we'll play a game of Go. And they sit down and the students become Go masters. And then it's like, how does this make me a sword master? It's like, okay, now I'll teach you how to fight with a sword. And you fight and you're like, wait a minute. So you have to surround them before you make your final strike. You have to always make sure your defenses are shored up. If you ever have a moment, you fall back. So it teaches you how to be a sword fighter through just playing Go. Yeah. And so it allows for that. Here's the 6 basic things you need to know. You need to know creativity. You need to know stance. You need to know this. Mm. And so he gets you to chop wood. He gets you to play Go. He gets you to wax his deck. Yeah. And then what happens potentially is the playing Go, waxing the deck, and chopping wood becomes codified until that is a tradition that has a very specific way you have to do it, rather than that being the room for you to explore within. Yeah. That becomes the tradition. And that, thereby, instead of being the space to teach you all about the martial art in a way that can't be forgotten, you then focus on just, okay, well, you're not playing Go right. You have to play Go in this specific way.
Yeah, well...
Constant corruption and decay.
Yes. Well, the corruption of the fianna, right? Yeah. Corruption of structures. So there's actually a very common thing in martial arts. This happened in Avatar, where when... what's his name? The guy who didn't have bending. Anyways... When he went to the Swordmaster to learn from him, the Swordmaster had him paint a picture. There's a very common thing in martial arts, which is do art at the same time as doing martial arts, like any sort of art form, like carving, crafting, painting. Calligraphy was a very common one. Musashi did a bunch of calligraphy. But if you go through Musashi's 5 rings and the thought of Bushido, which is the way of the warrior, there's a very interesting thing that can be found in Musashi's works. The translator talked about this a bit more because he actually explored the ideas, which was great about the translator, the version I listened to. But one of the huge lessons that Musashi had is you do things in life and you do them right. So you do calligraphy and you do calligraphy right. Musashi was also a carpenter. He actually built houses and did things. And that was a part of his warrior training, was building houses so they had no flaws. And Japanese construction, they didn't have nails, so you actually had to have insane precision, have wood interlocked with itself. But so you perfect other pursuits to help you perfect the martial art. But you then perfect the martial art to help you perfect the life. And so even though Musashi was kind of obsessed with fighting, and he is like his living, breathing moment, he wanted to be a general tactician. He never got that, but it's like fighting. That was his whole world. He did that also to live the best life he could. And he was very skilled in a bunch of other things. Like, he was a good writer. He had very nice poetry. There's a few paintings that Musashi did in Japan, which are gorgeous works of art. And he basically applied the philosophy of one thing helps something else. And so pursue all things that you find meaningful and have them help each other.
Everything becomes a metaphor for everything else.
Yeah. And some martial arts are just like Tai Chi, which most people do. Like the middle-aged ladies trying to get exercise, that Tai Chi is no longer fighting. It is an art.
And I think China recognized that massively, the utility of everything.
Yeah.
But I think even that process needs to be renewed because at some point, China's Gung Fu became codified instead of being the endless pursuit of
the cultural
cultivation, I guess.
The Cultural Revolution also murdered the, Kung Fu or Gung Fu. Like, they had to rediscover it.
But I think they still have, like, I think China's always had the idea of Kung Fu, though.
Yeah.
The, like, hard work.
Yes.
It's their word for art.
Yeah.
And so you can have the Kung Fu of gardening.
Yeah, China has had it for so long that even the Cultural Revolution couldn't kill it.
But they, I wonder if somewhere along the line, so you see martial arts movies. Yeah. They'll do stuff like you have to carry like hot metal buckets with your bare hands, or you have to stick your hands into
or have
broken
a
glass.
battering ram hit you in the groin repeatedly.
And they do that a lot in China. This idea of overcoming everything through willpower and dedication
and the development of their alchemy, whatever that.
But their medicine, Chinese medicine. But I think that might be a corruption of the idea of perfecting all things to help you in all other things.
Yeah.
To develop your world within. And you get, like, they're not wrong. You see people that are good at something. They're good at everything.
Yeah.
I think Jordan Peterson's talked about this where it's disgusting. The people that are...
Jackie Chan. I mean, that guy has a radiant smile. He's a good singer.
He's a martial artist, actor.
He's a dancer. He's very charismatic.
Or you look at someone like Elon Musk.
Yeah.
So I saw actually I have a note here about this. How I saw someone saying that there's no way Elon Musk is an expert on all those topics. He's a businessman. Those businesses he runs, and he has people doing stuff for him. Yeah. If you read his biography, he is the expert at all his companies and all these things. So he wants to be able to talk to his engineers, so he learns all these things. It's amazing what a brilliant person can do. There's also people like Jordan Peterson. He'll talk about everything. He talks about politics. He talks about psychology. He talks about environment. And it's been said about, like, stick to your lane, stick to psychology. You can only know so much. But I do think that he actually does know about this. The highly intelligent and motivated people, motivated especially, intelligence helps with motivation. It's a force unto itself. You look at someone like Archimedes or Aristotle or Benjamin Franklin or Francis Bacon. These people, they did a million things.
Yeah.
Like you say, Isaac Newton, great physicist. Yeah, but he's also a great alchemist, and he was...
he was a good politician. Sir Isaac Newton?
Benjamin Franklin was a great writer, philosopher, politician.
Isaac Newton was an amazing politician.
Francis Bacon, amazing scientist, mysticist, politician, writer. We don't know everything he was up to because some people think he was Shakespeare. Yeah. So there's these people that it's hard to understand how incredible a single person can be and how much they can do. And I think that part of it is this idea of it's a lot easier.
You only get one thing to be good at. That's that I believe that people seem to have. You only get to have one thing that you're good at.
Well, I used to think everyone was sort of balanced. Like everyone had, if you added up everyone's stats, they all came out to the same number. Yeah. But what it seems like is that people who are more intelligent also tend to be better looking and healthier and stronger.
How old's the Bible?
Depends which one, but pretty old.
Yeah, let's go with Jesus. So
2,000 years ago was Jesus.
2,000. So the poor will have nothing, and the rich will have everything.
Yeah, from the poor will be from those who have nothing, everything will be taken. From those who have everything, all will be given. Yeah,
that this has been known.
Yeah, but it's this idea of I think there's an aspect of it's a lot easier with language. You master French, let's say. You become a fluent French speaker. It becomes much easier to learn any Latin language. Mm-hmm. Like you can learn Spanish, Italian, Latin,
even
Portuguese.
Basic knowledge of Latin and French which I have, even though I'm terrible with other languages. I have basic knowledge of a lot of languages.
It makes biology and chemistry
And geography.
geography way easier.
Geography way easier. That's how I like did so well in my geography classes. It's like people are like, how are we supposed to remember all these names? And it's like that's it's literally means pointy peak.
Yeah.
Like it's really simple.
Yeah, psychology as well. There's they name them to be easy to remember. They're not just choosing random words.
Mm-hmm.
They choose words that mean what the things they're saying. But
that's rounded stone. That's what it means.
and then what that does is that means that okay, now you're really good at geography. And so now you can use geography to help you with history.
Yeah.
And now you can use history to help you with I don't know.
Tactics.
Being a history teacher. What else is history good for? Philosophy.
Yeah.
Or geopolitics. Or
the understanding of nature, human nature. It's weird. So we're talking about a teacher teaching you to learn versus a teacher is teaching you. And two of my favorite teachers of all time, one was a physics teacher, another was a new media teacher. And the physics teacher was disliked by a lot of students, and everyone said his classes are so hard. And that's because he wanted to teach the students how to learn. He wanted to teach them how to learn physics. And so he is like, I'm just here to pass the physics class. And he's there going, so why, though, with gravity? It's not going to teach you gravity, it's why gravity? And people are like, what on earth? And then the new media teacher is supposed to be teaching new media. So it's, how do you use Photoshop? How do you do basic design? How do you do video editing? And he asked a class question. So he chose like an ancient piece of pottery. Why is it drawn like this? And this is a question about design. It's like, why is it drawn? It's like, looking at HP, what? Or why is this made out of this material? Or why is it like this? And what he was teaching is, like, he taught these things, like how to do Photoshop and all that stuff, but also
the concept of...
Yeah, the concept, the nature of it. Humans design things because they're human. That was like the biggest thing, that if you look at art from 1,000 years ago all the way to the cave paintings, if you look at ancient Japanese maps and the way they were designed, if you look at European tapestry art, if you look at the First Nations oral traditions, they all have something in common, and so they're made by humans. And so look at the nature of humans and why they make their things that way. And if you do that,
you'll understand art.
Yeah, you understand art, you understand design.
Actually, the book I'm reading right now has this great section where the guy talks about his history teacher when he was a kid.
Yeah.
And the history teacher... So he talks about how most history classes, it's like, when was this general born? What day was this battle fought? What was this? And the history teacher was like, no, none of that's important. Why did that general fight? Why did this battle happen? Mm-hmm. What kind of man was this person? Why did he serve his country? What was his country? What was worth serve? And if you learn all that, your memory of history is much better, because you don't have to even memorize everything. You can interpolate, because it's like, okay, why did Napoleon invade the rest of Europe? And it's like, well, it was on this date and he did this. But it's like, no, because the French had a spirit. They believed that they, whatever it might be. I don't really know why he did it, actually. But if you understand the man, you don't have to know every little detail. Why did he fight this battle the way he did? Because he was Napoleon. Mm-hmm. It's not, okay, Napoleon was born. It's much more important to learn who was Napoleon than what day was he born and what day did he fight his battles.
Yeah. When did he die?
Yeah. How did he lose at Waterloo? It's like, well, he was 43 and 60. No, it's because everyone was against him, and
the world was against him. He was sick. The conditions weren't in his favor.
And you need to look at the man or the history, the great events. And
well, even like when you understand these people, when you understand humans are humans, they've always have been, and you look at all the times like, why on earth would someone do trial by combat? So you think about that, or trial by cake, like any of these things. And it's like, oh, I can gamify it, I can get out of it. And to a certain extent, there might have been that, but also they had these things because they had deep beliefs.
Yeah, so actually this is something that's really important. If you just think history is the memorization of dates, then you don't understand the Waldensian heresy. And the Waldensian heresy was insane, because all the Waldensians believed, I believe, was that Jesus was God.
Yes.
And they were like burned from the... They were killed wholesale for it.
Same with the Vandals.
And you say, well, okay, but that you can say that event happened. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was the past. That doesn't happen now. Those were the exact same people.
Yeah.
You need so learning those dates won't tell you this. But if you say, look, the world's frightening as it is. Everything's a mess. Everything's confusing. The church is your one beacon of stability. And then these people are willing to kill for their beliefs about this and overthrow
minuscule
this
thing.
tiny little detail, and say Jesus is God, which then might overthrow your concept of, wait, but I relate to Jesus because he was a man who was God.
Yeah.
And that destabilization, well, that couldn't happen to, but once you learn that, okay, these people, they were scared and this was something that gave them hope and they believed in. The Waldensians or the Catholics.
Yeah.
It was something they believed in, and it was one was clashing against the other. And you can apply that today with the social justice or with, let's say, Russia invading Ukraine. These people, maybe their beliefs aren't your beliefs in the slightest, but they believe in something, and these things will happen again, and they keep happening.
You telling me that shocking thing with Russia?
Oh, where Kiev is the...
Yeah, but like Ukraine, from a certain perspective, is Russia.
Yeah.
Is the Rouge.
Well, so Rus Kiev was the home of the Rus people.
Yeah.
So Kiev was their capital, and so it's a mythological center. Now, the Soviet Union, I believe it was, guaranteed Ukraine's independence over 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Or basically exactly 100 years ago, something like that. And the Ukrainians wanted independence because they, like, it didn't just happen randomly. They're not like, they weren't just like, we're going to cut off a section of the country and call it Ukraine. They believed that they had lived in this region for long enough that they were a different nation. They were Ukrainians living under Russian rule. And so when they said to the Soviet Union, hey, we don't feel like we're Russians, the Soviet Union was like, yeah, that makes sense. So how about we become allies and we give you your own country? It'd be like if Canada said, hey, Quebec, we're cutting you off, but we're still close allies.
Yeah.
And just like Quebec, basically all of Canada views Quebec as Canadian.
Yeah.
But a lot of Quebecers don't view themselves as Canadian.
Yeah.
And so most of Russians probably thought Ukrainians were just Russians because they viewed themselves as Kievians or Kievites, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
But the people of Kiev said, no, you're not like us. We stayed in the heartland. You left.
But just even, like, why is there this invasion going on? And then it's like, that is...
Because it's the mythological impetus. It's the legend of the Rus. Now, that might not be Putin's entire motivation.
No.
There's a lot of natural...
But
Ukraine is a very naturally resource-rich country.
It gives you another point of view of this conflict.
And if you look at it this way, too, Ukraine is a weak military compared to Russia, and very naturally resource-rich.
Yeah.
But so is Canada, and so is Australia.
Yeah.
Russia didn't invade those two countries. Now, you could argue that Canada and Australia are protected by the United States. That could be the reason they didn't invade Canada. But I think there is also the aspect of, if there was a nation that was fairly weak with tons of resources, but Putin didn't have some... Because he needs his people to fight for him.
Yeah. Casus belli.
He needs to say, look, the Russian people of Ukraine want to come back to Russia. They're being tortured here. I heard someone describe the Ukraine-Russian war very interestingly as the delayed civil war that never happened from the collapse of the Soviet Union. So it's the Russian civil war that never happened. And the Russians, some Russians might see it that way. I don't think the Ukrainians do for the most part.
Yeah.
But Russians, so it's sort of like a square is a rectangle, but a rectangle isn't a square.
Yeah.
Where the Russians are like, oh yeah, Ukrainians, they're Russians. But the Ukrainians are like, Russians aren't Ukrainian.
Yeah.
And so you have this conflict of...
but it's just...
Potentially. I'm not saying this is what is.
Yeah, I'm not saying it. It's just...
But if you just said...
That's one more piece to the story, or not even the story, the reality of what this is. It's
the mythos.
Yeah.
The mythos of the Rus.
Yeah.
The rowers.
Yeah, there is more to the tale than meets the eye, because I think ignorance, again, humans, the ignorance has always existed. And then...
You can't know everything.
You can't know everything. And so...
you play EU4 and you didn't know about Kiev.
Yeah.
So...
But so, with ignorance, though, when you're ignorant of something, there's many different approaches, but there's two very common approaches. One is what is considered the Enlightenment approach, I think, which is Actually, I don't know if it's the Enlightenment. Maybe it's the mysticism approach, which is I don't know things, and so I need to know more, but I still won't know everything. It's sort of that thought of constantly learning and acceptance of ignorance. And the other one is anger with ignorance, or disgust.
I think the stereotypical hillbilly, oh, I don't understand this, it scares me, I don't like.
No, I'm not talking about, like, it's not just the hillbilly, though, it's...
Well, how about this as a compromise sort of idea? Arrogance.
Yes.
You don't...
Sorry, that's why I meant arrogance, not anger. Arrogance. Arrogance. So, the lack of knowing things, so ignorance leads to arrogance.
Because you don't know that you don't know things. Yeah. So you think you know... Actually, I meant to talk... Unfortunately, my voice, can't talk all the time. But our mother said something that I've been meaning to talk to her about, where she said, economy can't grow, that's a misconception. And I thought, what? Says who? Economy can't grow? That's the craziest idea I've ever heard.
Every time a person's born.
But the whole stock market is founded on the idea of economic growth. Yeah. The whole modern monetary system we operate under, currency is based on the idea of economic growth. If there is no economic growth, that means that the stock market's a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah.
The entire thing. Maybe it is. But if a dandelion is in my garden, right, and I want to pluck it, it's a weed, right?
Yeah. So
I pluck this weed from my garden, and I give it to you because you want to make some dandelion wine. Mm-hmm. I have gained a better garden. You have gained dandelion wine. The economy has increased for both of us, and no resources have been expended.
Now, if we go to hypothetical physics, you can make the argument that economy cannot grow.
Why is that?
But because
the universe is infinite. Remember,
the universe is infinite, but energy is limited.
What do you mean by that?
Well, so it comes to the question of the universe is infinitely expanding, but comes from a single beginning point of the Big Bang,
right?
Is what we think of, and there was a certain amount of energy that happened there,
right?
And so the conflict arises, where this is why I said hypothetical physics is the universe expanding and generating energy from nothing in the expansion, or is it continually expanding from a point where energy was made, and we will reach a point of entropy where energy is equally distributed, and so the economy of the universe cannot grow because energy is its economy.
So every economic action generates entropy until the death of the universe.
Yes.
Yeah, that would be...
So that's the hypothetical physics, far, far broader scope of economy.
But does that even fit the definition of economy anymore? Because economists, right? Economists don't think ahead, right? They think next 5 years profit. They don't think about long-term profit. They hunt all the whales because that'll make the most profit now. Except that's not true, right? Because economists aren't morons.
Yeah.
They know that there's different frames of time for economy.
Well, so...
They're operating within a useful frame. You have to set boundaries to be useful.
British Empire, I think in the 1600s, had a biologist. And they hired him to go to the coasts of Canada and to look at the fishing grounds there. And also go to a bunch of different coasts where fishing was done. And his job was to determine, can we keep fishing at the rate we're fishing and still have fish, or will they all disappear? And with his knowledge and all his thoughts at the time, looking at the fish we had, and he said, well, from all intents and purposes, from what appears and our practices and like the way the resources are coming out of the ocean, I can conceive of no future we'll run out of fish as it is. And so it wasn't the fact that it's like, oh, we're just going to keep stripping the oceans until we can't do it anymore. It's the best professional at the time, hired by the most powerful country in the world, was wrong because he didn't expect the explosion of population in humanity.
Yeah.
That was his mistake, because if the population of humanity stayed at the same rate, then they could have kept fishing out the way they did. He was right with what data he had.
So theoretically, humans may someday encompass the entire universe.
Yeah.
And so under that circumstance, assuming that the second law of thermodynamics is correct, and assuming you cannot teleport to other universes, then the economy could be finite. But I think also, there's this idea that life is an anti-entropic mechanism. Mm-hmm. Now, the sum total is greater entropy than it counters. But the economy is for humans, right?
Yeah.
So unless humans are immortal, we are actually non-entropic devices during our lifetime.
And
because we create... So if you write... Let's say you write a book. and 1 million people read that from a digital file. No. There's a giant, you carve a giant plinth.
Yeah.
So that everyone on Earth can see no matter where they're standing. And they read that. You've given value to everyone on Earth at no... Like, obviously the light ions and whatnot are getting used up as they enter the eyes.
There's also, I mean, I don't know how based this is. Based in... Like, I could be making this up, but I've heard it several times. Which is, if you take a human and you break them down to all their elements, like every single bit, and you get all the weights, all that stuff, you, like, lose 0.6% of mass.
So there was an idea, a person died,
Yeah.
and their weight lowered shortly after death. They were on a scale when they died or something like that. And so the idea was that the soul weighs about 6 grams. I don't think that's been able to be replicated.
Yeah. But it's not that experiment that I'm talking about. This is actually, if you break someone down into all their elements and you count for them by mass, so not weight by mass, we mix a little bit. And that could just be because we don't know the chemical. It could be like the bacteria, certain things in their body not making up. But still, there's a margin of error of information. And so even that has an effect of maybe something is going to get created, something is getting destroyed. But like even with everything we know, there is a margin of error for the soul.
Right. I'd be doubtful, but it's possible, right? Because that's the thing of arrogance, right?
Mm-hmm.
You say you know something, and then you think that you are the one, and everyone else is crazy and acting. So this is a great example in the last couple of years. Not great for YouTube, but great in general. Anti-vaxxers, when I was a kid, were crazy.
Yeah.
There are these absolute lunatics that were bringing back measles and mumps and rubella and ruining everyone's lives. And it turned out that that's not exactly the case. That vaccines do kill people. They do have downsides. And even if everything was great on that front to an extent, the companies are human and they're very corrupt. And so let's say vaccines work perfectly. Let's say the COVID vaccine works perfectly. Lock everyone inside till they get the vaccine. Works perfectly. But the highest comorbidity for death from COVID is obesity.
Yeah.
And you've just locked everyone inside so that they can get their vaccine. When you might have saved more lives by saying, right, you've got a workout regime now. Everyone has to walk half an hour a day.
Yeah.
That might have saved more lives. Like, you can go about seeing your friends and family, but you have to walk half an hour a day. That could have potentially saved more lives. Or you say, okay, everyone take vitamin D. Once it reaches, what is it? It was 400 international units per day, or I can't remember. Yeah. Don't dose based on my poor memory, because that's a terrible idea. But vitamin D it was, yeah. The death rate from COVID drops to basically 0. It dropped to 0 on their test, but you can only test so many people. So you test 1,000, it's at 0, but at 1,000,000, there's still going to be deaths.
Yeah.
So it could have been that vitamin D would have been way more effective than the vaccine. And vitamin D is incredibly cheap to produce. The problem with vitamin D and the problem with exercise is that they're very cheap. You can produce something, I can't remember what it is. It's crazy. Like, you can produce like 10 pounds of vitamin D for like a penny or something. Or I can't remember. Maybe that's too, but it's like very cheap. Maybe it's like a penny a pound or something. It's very, very cheap to produce. And then companies like Pfizer and Moderna, they're not going to be making boatloads of cash. And they're not going to be making all these shady deals with governments like, hey, we scratch your back, you scratch ours, we make tons of money. So even if you completely trust the vaccines, there still could be better methods.
Yeah.
And that's where the arrogance comes in, that these people that, you can dismiss them like as these crazy anti-vaxxers. They might have had a better method that you weren't even listening to because you dismissed them out of hand already.
Yeah. You think you know something.
Yeah, you think you know something, but they actually already know your argument, and they know their own argument. So they know your argument and theirs. They know one better. It's often the people that are at the margins that know everyone's arguments. The atheists used to be like this, where they had read the Bible. They knew the Bible back to front better than the Christians, and they were able to argue it with them, and they knew what they're talking about. And now that atheism has taken over, they dismiss the Bible out of hand.
Yeah.
And they don't realize that there's a massive amount of value in there. It's the arrogance of...
one of the things that I found very interesting during Pierre was talking about the Bible is, because I was saying, like, how old is it? Is this book has been rewritten over and over and over and over again. At this point, there is not a detail left in this book that is superfluous. Like, every single thing, like, all that, because it's been revised so many times, and be worked on so much is gone. Everything in it, like, you write a book and it's like, oh, and he had pink underwear because you felt like writing that. And then someone else comes along, rewrites your book. This detail isn't relevant to the story. Goodbye. And so those details are gone from the Bible.
Of course, sometimes they are very relevant.
Yeah.
And you don't know what you're doing. But sometimes things are included for a very important reason. Like, I mean, Francis Bacon's...
Well, even if the Roman emperor who codified the Bible destroyed like over 10,000 stories of the Christian story collection to turn it into one book because some of those books didn't support what he needed them to support.
And it all needed to fit in one book.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, like the Book of Enoch is really interesting, and it's not in the Bible at all. But it talks about how Enoch dealt with the children of the angels and the humans, the Hylim, or whatever they're called.
Is the Book of Enoch the one... Sorry, which book has Longinus in it?
I don't know.
Okay. So what's the villain from Harry Dresden?
Nicodemus.
Yeah, the Book of Nicodemus.
Yeah.
Is not considered one of the proper scriptures. It's like one of the esoteric minor discard ones.
Yeah.
And it has a whole bunch of extra details. Like, it has...
Nicodemus was the guy that buried Jesus, right? Or
yeah.
No, he was given the Grail or something?
Yeah. But, so it has Longinus in it, Saint Longinus, who is called the first Christian. And that's because, so everyone that was following Jesus, they were Jewish, and they were the acolytes who taught his lessons, and they were going along with him. Whereas Longinus was the Roman soldier who killed Jesus on the cross because he could no longer bear to see Jesus' suffering on the cross. And so he stabbed him through the ribs to pierce his heart and kill him. And then he was assigned to the grave. And when they rolled open the boulder and Jesus was gone, he converted to Catholicism because God acted.
The Christianity.
Yeah, Christianity. God acted. And so he's the first Christian. And he's like the protector saint of Jesus. Like, this guy guarded the tomb. He had mercy on Jesus. He is the wielder of the Spear of Destiny, which is an artifact that Vatican probably has stored away somewhere.
Yeah.
Or someone has anyways. But it's an important item, even if it's just a Roman legionnaire spear. And so this guy has huge amount of importance. And even though he's from the Book of Nicodemus and he's a lesser known state, he's still... There's a church dedicated to him because of his importance, but the Book of Nicodemus has a whole bunch of things they got rid of, and it's because they didn't like Nicodemus because he is positive towards the Romans. Even though they converted over later on, Nicodemus is basically merciful in his beliefs and views and gives a lot of...
That's not what Jesus would have wanted.
Yeah, he gave a lot of kindness to... Or not kindness, it was sympathy to people.
Empathy.
Yeah, empathy, yeah. Nicodemus had a ton of empathy.
I wanted to mention, because we went past it, and it's slightly important, because I've seen people do this before, and I don't like it when they do it. The history book, this was the funny reveal I was going to pull off, but if I don't reveal that it was meant to be a joke, people are going to think very negatively of me. The history teacher was Hitler's history teacher. The book I'm reading is Mein Kampf, which is so far about Hitler's childhood, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
So...
I thought a lot of people said Mein Kampf was quite hard to read and really dull.
Yeah, I don't know what they're talking about. Maybe it gets worse, but so far it's very interesting. Maybe it's just because I read the Communist Manifesto first, and everything seems better after that. I don't know if you want to go more in ignorance, or I can go in a little bit into Hitler's childhood, because it's really interesting.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so... Napoleon, when he invaded Prussia, and he took the Bavarian king and he set him as king of the whole German region, and as his vassal, and so he made Germany and Prussia subservient through Bavaria to the French, and that was known as Germany's moment of greatest humiliation.
Yeah.
It was a German event in their minds. This is our moment of greatest humiliation. Similar to
beaten by the French.
Well, that wasn't the worst of it. The worst of it was that they were forced under Bavarian rule.
Yeah.
So that's similar to the idea of China's moment of humiliation. It's something that lasted with Germans for 100 years, up to Hitler's day. this moment they hated. So there was a publisher who published an anti-Napoleon book.
Yeah.
And he was captured, arrested, and they said, "Tell us who wrote this. Whose work are you publishing? This giant because he was just handing out these anti-Napoleon pamphlets." And he said, so they captured the publisher and said, "Tell us who wrote this." And he said, "I'm not going to tell you." And they tortured him, and he refused to tell. So Napoleon himself ordered him to be put to death.
Yeah.
And that guy was related somehow to another freedom fighter against Napoleon, who is considered one of the greatest German heroes against the fight against the French. And that man was also killed. He was a martyr to Napoleon. So these two men were martyrs to Napoleon, linked somehow. I can't quite remember. That man was born and died, or at least died, in a tiny little village in Austria, where Hitler grew up. So there was a statue to this man who was Hitler's greatest hero. He was the guy who he refused to give in to the French, and he withstood them at all costs. So after World War I, Germany was forced to pay reparations for the war, which they didn't start the war, but they were forced to pay for everyone. Yeah. They crippled Germany to the point where the entire country went bankrupt and they defaulted on their debt. So France invaded. Yeah. It's called the occupation of the Ruhr in the history book. You say, oh, French occupied the Ruhr. When you read from Hitler's perspective, it's the French invasion of Germany. It's very interesting, the difference. Yeah. So France marched into the occupied region of Germany, to the Ruhrland, with the intent of freeing the Rhodesians, making them their own country. And they also wanted to support, there was an election going on for the leader of Bavaria, because Bavaria was part of Germany at this point, to make him to secede from the Germany, so that Bavaria would become its own place, the Rhodesians would get their own place, France would regain control of the Ruhr so that they could ensure that they were getting the coal and steel they deserved, because Germany wasn't giving them money anymore, because Germany had no money. So the French said, fine,
America had all their money. Naturally, it did. I was learning about this whole thing about how America became a superpower continued.
So France said, okay, we're gonna just take it by force then. If you're not gonna give it to us, we're just gonna take every resource you ever make. And we're going to make the Bavarians their own country. We're going to make the Rhodesians their own country. And what that would do was, Bavarians were Catholic under the same denomination as Napoleon. Sorry, as not Napoleon at this point, the French. Yeah. Which means that the French would have a very close Bavarian ally. They'd have the richest land in
Germany and France.
They would have the Ruhr, and they already got from World War I the Rhineland. What's it called?
That mountain range, which is uncertain if they're German or French.
No, there's like a giant plain.
Oh yeah.
Between Germany and France got it after World War I believe it was. Yeah. So they already had that. They were also taking
really good farmland.
They were taking Germany's mining district, and they were going to get rid of the Bavarians, which is a large, powerful chunk of Germany, which would essentially mean that the French had allies that were essentially vassals all across all of Europe, and it would allow them to, in essence, because of their strong ties to the church, rule all of Europe. Yeah. So, some Germans didn't like this because it would essentially mean France conquered Europe. Yeah. So Hitler led a protest with Ludendorff, the great general from World War I, and they marched into the meeting where they were talking about the election to secede from Germany, and they broke that meeting up. Yeah. Like a group of angry feminists, they rang the fire alarms and they marched around and said, "My body, my choice." Actually, Hitler jumped on a table and shot his gun in the air, which is way cooler than what the feminists do. Yeah. But
an air horn.
I do wonder about the cultural implications. Like, was that a normal thing to shoot your gun in the air at the time, or was that considered an act of violence?
I think it's an act of violence, but also a way to get people's attention.
Because it was apparently very noisy in there. Yeah. Like nowadays, if you did that, you would go to prison. Yeah. But I do wonder if that was just. This was before gun laws were so extreme. Who knows? Yeah. And apparently Hitler actually got like the entire meeting on his side. So in the end, everyone was happy with him. Yeah. Because he's a very good speaker. So he got everyone on his side. And so they started marching down to the government to protest the occupation of the Ruhr. At the top of the hill as they were coming up towards the governmental building. So Ludendorff, I think, was the one that suggested they do the march on the Capitol. Might have been Hitler. There was French or German military or police there. Yeah. I think it might have been French police or German police. They opened fire on the crowd.
Protester?
Yeah. And they killed 16 people, injured a bunch more. Hitler broke his collarbone. And
Is that how he ended up in prison?
then Hitler was put on trial and sent to prison for 5 years.
Oh.
And while he was in prison, he wrote Mein Kampf.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is very weird. I've never heard of the French invasion.
Yeah.
I have never heard of Hitler leading a protest and the protest being fired upon by soldiers. So now I'm reading Mein Kampf, so I'm like, is Hitler lying? What's going on here? So I looked it up.
That's what I was about to ask, is cross-examine.
So I do remember learning about the beer hall putsch in history class, or putsch. I don't know how to pronounce it. Which in the history, well, at least Wikipedia, this is my quick check, but was Hitler's attempted coup of the German government.
Yeah.
Which is how it was framed. In Mein Kampf, it's framed as Hitler's like counter coup protest, essentially. Like, we don't want the Bavarians to secede. We want to keep Germany German. We don't want the Bavarians to secede. So in Hitler's account, he's trying to keep. It would be like Quebec's trying to secede, and they go in their march like, no, don't secede. But then it's framed as Hitler tries to take over Canada. It's maybe. I don't know. But it was a totally different viewpoint, which I thought was interesting. And the thing that wasn't mentioned in Mein Kampf is that the protesters fired back on the police and killed 2 police officers. Now, that's 2 police, 14 protesters. I mean...
it's death in any number.
You see... But then you see the January 6th riots where people, to this day, it's like, it was just some people doing a protest. It was a coup on the government in the United States. So, I don't know if there will ever be a real accounting of events of what happened. Like, was Hitler trying to actually overthrow the government then and there? Or was... Like, if he was trying to overthrow the government, right? Why did he get 5 years in prison? Like, surely that's treason. Why didn't he get 20 or life or something? So that one I thought was a bit weird. Maybe he was popular. He was a Iron Cross first class. So you don't just lock someone.
He is a veteran.
Yeah, you could tick people off. But he was a veteran with the Iron Cross first class.
Yeah.
That's the highest, or second. I guess the Order of Germany would be higher, but that's a pretty high award.
Yeah.
And Ludendorff was part of it, and everyone loved Ludendorff.
Yeah.
So then the record says Ludendorff got angry at Hitler because he ran away when the crowd was shot on. Whereas in Mein Kampf it says Hitler fell and was injured. And so Ludendorff never talked to Hitler again. But then there's historical accounts of Ludendorff and Hitler long after this event meeting up with each other and talking, and Hitler going to his funeral and being very upset and giving a great speech. So it was a lie that Ludendorff and Hitler had a falling out. Whatever historian wrote that. So that is definitely a lie. Or at least a misunderstanding somewhere. Like, maybe Ludendorff was angry for a while. Maybe Hitler did run. But they obviously kept meeting up constantly, so there was still something going on. So, 2 very different viewpoints of the events. So then going to Hitler's childhood, very interesting. His dad was very poor growing up.
Yeah.
And his old Poppy Hitler, first of the Hitler name.
Yeah.
Because he changed his name.
Oh.
It used to be Hitler or something like that, but he changed it to Hitler. So, old Poppy Hitler was a very poor man, and he was determined to do better in his life. So he worked very hard, studied very hard. He managed to become a civil servant for the government. So he moved up to middle class.
Yeah.
And he married this old woman for her money. She was like 50, and when he was 30, she died quite young. He got a bunch of money, so that was nice for him. He married someone else who was about his age. She died, and then they divorced. They didn't like each other. He married his niece.
Typical German.
And so now it's not quite sure what her relation was. Like, she might have been his cousin, might have been his niece, might have been his half cousin, half niece. But what's really creepy is apparently there's records of during the wedding ceremony, her still calling him uncle. Like, that's gross.
Yeah.
Like, even if she is your niece, just don't call him uncle anymore. That's weird. So he had a bunch of kids with the first few wives, like 1 to 3-ish.
Yeah.
I think it might have been 3. 2 of them died or how'd that work? Anyways, he had a couple kids with the first wives, and then this third wife, who was his niece, they had a bunch of kids. Most of those kids died, maybe because of inbreeding. I don't know. Yeah. But so Hitler had an older brother, an older sister, and a younger sister.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that ended up surviving. He also had a brother and a sister that died, and a few others. So they grew up.
I know his older brother survived.
His brother,
because he was in America.
Britain. Yeah,
Britain.
He was a restaurant owner, I think.
Yeah,
and he got arrested.
Yes, and He's like, come on.
Yeah.
Basically, that's actually the story of his like trial. Is like, I moved here, I live here. I obviously want to be like, what?
He's my little half brother. We haven't talked in 20 years.
Yeah. Like, what do you want from me? I make sausages.
I married an Irish woman.
Yeah.
Actually, it was interesting because apparently during World War One, the Irish woman, he was in Germany when World War One started.
Yeah.
So he joined the German army.
Mm.
So, and then he wasn't able to return to Ireland for like 4 years. So they thought he was dead, and he ended up marrying a German. So then he went to get to church because he had 2 wives at the same time. But then he got his Irish wife forgave him because she's like, well, you couldn't know. We thought you were dead. Everyone thought you were dead. So.
And then he had 2 wives.
So Hitler went to school. He was allowed to go to school, not just directly to work or something.
Yeah.
And his dad really wanted him to do good as well. He wanted him to be a civil servant as well. Because his dad had in his mind that...
Screw you, Dad. I'm going to be an artist.
That's exactly what happened. So he really wanted... And it's this really interesting tragedy. So Hitler grew up really not wanting to be a civil servant. That's what his dad wanted. And Hitler loved painting. He wanted to be a painter. So he really wanted to be a painter. And in school, Hitler was really smart kid, did great in school, all his classes. And that's where he talked about his teacher, who was a great history teacher, and made him fall in love with history. Yeah. And made him fall in love with Germany, because they lived in Austria, but they were Germans.
Yeah.
So Hitler began to think, man, we're just the Habsburgs rule over us, and we have this strong German spirit that yearns to be free. I live in the town where the greatest German hero of the last 100 years lived and fought against Napoleon. Yeah. I want to be free. So he gave him very strong nationalistic vibes, just this teacher. And said the teacher was a very kind man, but, it's like, you're German, this is our history, that sort of thing. So Hitler argued with his dad a lot. Like, he was quite young. He was like 10 or 11 or 12. He's like, I want to be a painter. His dad's like, no, you'll be a civil servant like me. You'll be a civil servant. You don't want to go to a life of poverty like I had. And so to prove his point, Hitler, to show how dedicated he was to being a painter, every single class that Hitler thought would help with painting, he excelled and got top of his class. Yeah. And every class he thought had nothing to do with painting, like math, maybe geography, that sort of thing. Every class that didn't have to do with painting, he was the worst in his class in. Yeah. So he showed his dad, look, I am choosing to fail these classes. Because I'm obviously a good student. I'm getting top marks in all these classes. I'm purposely failing these classes. Except for history. He didn't think he needed history for painting, but he just loved it so much he did great in that class too. So he did this despite his dad. He didn't try in any of those classes, and he tried really hard in painting. And because he's like, I'm going to be a painter, I'm going to be a painter, I'm going to be a painter. And this fighting went up until his dad died. His dad died when Hitler was quite young. So Hitler was 13 or 14 when his dad died. And he left the whole family what do you call it? Inheritance. Inheritance to live off of. A small inheritance, but inheritance. Because his civil servant had made him a bit of money.
And so that old woman.
Yeah, potentially. I don't know how much she ended up making him. But he had a little bit of money for the family. So they could keep going along. They were poor now, but they could still afford to send the kids to school, that sort of thing. Hitler, I think it was just Hitler and his 2 sisters that all lived together, basically. The older brother was gone by then. So they could keep going to school, but Hitler's mom fell ill very shortly after his father's death. And her illness drained their savings like instantly. So they ran out of money very quickly, like in a year. And then his mother died. So just before she died, Hitler was like, hey, we're running out of money, might not get a shot again. I want to go to university. So he's 14 or 15. So he goes to Vienna on his own, travels to Vienna when he's 14 or 15, and applies. He gathers his portfolio of all his paintings he's done, all his drawings. He goes and he says, I want to be a painter. He applies, and he felt quite confident in it. So he was...
Well, his paintings are good.
They're not bad,
They're not bad.
But... they didn't like his style or his what. So he felt quite confident though. He's like, yeah, I'm going to be a shoo-in to be a painter. I'm going to go to university. So, while he was doing this, while he was in school before he applied, he realized that he really loved painting, but he loved even more potentially, equally or even more, architecture. He really loved architecture. He discovered. He's like, wow, this stuff really fun. So that was the second passion he had awakened. So his German nationalism, his architecture, and his painting. So he goes to the University of Vienna. He applies to be a painter, and he hangs around in Vienna for like a week until they get back to him, and they say, "Sorry, you're rejected." So he's confused, upset. So he goes and he talks to the admissions people, and he says, "I don't know what to do. What happened? Why didn't I get in?" And they're like, "Oh, your paintings they're not quite good enough for us, or they're not quite right for us." But when we went through your portfolio, But here's the thing, right? Like, we don't want you in the painting department of our school. And so he's devastated. We're like, no. When we're going through your paintings, your line drawings, your sketches are amazing. You would be a shoo-in for the architecture course.
Yeah.
And Hitler loved architecture. They're like, look, you're basically already in the architecture. We'll let you into architecture. You can do that.
Yeah.
All you have to do is pass a general exam. Hitler hadn't been studying classes for his entire life to show his dad, so he couldn't pass the general exam to get into university, because they're like, you're a shoo-in for architecture, just pass this.
But you have to have general knowledge for university.
Yeah, it's just, not for architecture. For the painting, you didn't need it, but for the architecture, you just needed a bit of math and a bit of, and Hitler didn't have any of that, so he couldn't pass those exams because they were like, oh yeah, you're not going to painting, but we want you in architecture, and he's like, oh, but I don't have math, and they're like, oh, well, you have to learn it then. So Hitler realized he had to study math. And then his mom died very shortly after. So then he decided, I'm going to make a go of it. He has this very uplifting message, he says, which is, the obstacles were placed in my path not to be ogled at, but to be overcome.
So you laugh at it there. It's weird, because there is this thought of separating the art from the artist. And then there's the murdering baby Hitler.
Yeah.
Hitler at age 18.
Yeah. Or 15.
Yeah, 15. Even Hitler at age 20, like I don't know how old he was in World War II, was not the man who decided to commit genocide. Now, the man who did that is the man who did it when he did that.
I don't know what Hitler writes about entirely in this, but his sisters, both of them, after World War II, both claimed to their dying day Hitler didn't know about the Holocaust. Which seems unlikely, but I guess it could be possible.
Yeah, but even
if he did do the Holocaust,
I think about every single stupid thing you did when you were younger.
Yeah,
think that is not who you are. And as much as that, the kid you were when you were innocent, because there's the innocence of childhood, is innocent from all the things you've done now because they didn't do them. And so there is this thing, like it's a sort of got you on Reddit, which is, if you enjoyed this painting, you enjoyed painting by Hitler.
Yeah.
And why I said, like, you're saying they're all right, I actually like his paintings. Like, they're not the best paintings, but I enjoyed them. And it's a pointless gotcha.
I've only seen, like, they're really yellow, the ones I've seen.
It's a pointless gotcha. That is not the man who did that.
Yeah, and even if it was, even if he did that while, it's still a nice painting or not.
Yeah.
I think there is a...
Yeah, there's also even further on that artists can do horrible things and still make good art.
Yeah.
And then it falls to the question of that doctor from both Japan and Germany. And do we use their medical knowledge?
Like Frederick Engels.
Yeah, and...
Well, I think that's different.
Yeah, that is different.
Because then we're saying it's acceptable as long as you don't get caught, which...
Well, actually, yeah, I guess...
What we say by destroying his works is, we will never benefit from this, so you might as well not do it.
There is a harp that was worth several $1 million that was made during World War II and the Holocaust. And after the trials were going on, the harp was destroyed. And everyone who saw the harp said it was a work of art, it was beautiful, and it was the most disgusting thing they ever saw. And it's because it's made out of human bones.
Yeah, that's messed up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what you say is, by destroying it after the fact, what you're saying is, you've created nothing by doing this, therefore you shouldn't do it in the first place.
Yeah.
Because either way, nothing happens, therefore don't do it. I think that's what we say when we say that. So, yeah, so Hitler, his mom died. So then Hitler said, I respected my father, but I love my mom. And it devastated him. His sister said he was upset for basically the rest of his life.
I respected my father, I loved my mom and my auntie.
No, that'd be his cousin, right?
Once removed or something.
Not just, or just his direct cousin.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, so Hitler was devastated by that. And they were left with very little money. 1,000
marks.
Whatever it was back then. Yeah. And I have no idea what the worth of anything was back then, because they had that
terrible
hyperinflation and
terrible.
So Hitler went back to Vienna. He said, okay, I'm going to buy a bunch of books in Vienna, and I'm going to study the general studies so that I can get into university and I can
do architecture,
become an architect. Yeah. Because so that's what he's, obstacles were placed in his way, not to be ogled at, but to be overcome.
Yeah.
So he went to Vienna. He was incredibly poor. all his money went to food.
Yeah.
He had no spare money for anything but food and shelter. So every time he bought a school book, he had to not eat for several days.
Yeah.
And the other thing which is really interesting is Hitler was really into opera. From the first time he saw one as a kid, he loved it.
Yeah.
And there was an opera he'd go to that was all about German nationalism and Germany, and so he loved the opera. So while he was starving, and he would go for 4 days without food to buy, or well, maybe 2 days, I think it was, to buy a book so that he could study to get into architecture. He would occasionally go to the opera, which would mean he couldn't eat for a couple of days. Mm-hmm. So he would be like, I'm going to go to the opera and not eat for the next however many days. That's how much he loved the opera. And so he went to the opera studying for that, and that's as far as I've gotten so far. But it's definitely a...
Well, I can see why it's called My Struggle.
Yeah. Well, he wrote it while he was in prison. Oh, that's the intro as well.
Well, but even the being in prison is a struggle as well. But that's a struggle. His early life seems like it.
So Mein Kampf was published. Well, the English translation was published after he became Chancellor of Germany.
Yeah.
Before World War II, so 1938, 1939, somewhere in there. And the translator says that Hitler has said numerous times that he wrote this book at the lowest point in his life.
Yeah.
And little did he know, but he wrote this book at the lowest point in his life, and he doesn't stand by a lot of it that he wrote while he was in there. And so you ask, why doesn't Hitler write a revised version of Mein Kampf?
Yeah.
And the reason he didn't want to was he wanted to stand as a historical record of how he was feeling at that time.
Yeah.
But a lot of the stuff he said in this book, he no longer believes in. He no longer has this horrible hatred for France, I think was one of the things.
Yeah.
Which seems to be a lie.
Yeah.
And I don't blame him for hating France, really, but that seems to have been a lie that he had given up on that. Maybe he changed his mind. I don't know. Mm-hmm. Or maybe he just wanted, Czech Republic and Austria and all the Habsburg lands, and then France was like, hey, you can't do that. And then he's like, fine.
So there's a weird theory that America is responsible for World War II.
I think France is.
Well,
but the debt.
Yeah. Because the British had to get their money, and so they got it from Germany.
But they didn't have to saddle Germany with it. That was kind of France's big, dig of, we're going to make Germans pay.
Yeah.
And then after World War II, they're like, we're going to make Germans pay. They're like, stop it.
Well, Germany rules them again.
Yeah. But France was just, I don't know what. France was the bad guys, right? With Napoleon. I don't know why they were so... were they annoyed the Prussians revolted? Is that why they hated Germany so much? What was...
So, it's weird... Huh, that's funny. So, America and Canada are both ridiculously big places. And Canada has a very interesting internal struggle. Because, in Europe, France is pretty big, but in Europe, we have, the French and the Germans, and we have the Germans and the English and the French, and the English and the Irish, and the Irish and the Irish, and the Scots, and the... that whole thing. But they have these divided nationalities, and these nationalities are the reflections and influences of their beliefs, right? Their
history more.
Yeah, their history, but it's their history, but also their beliefs are the Englishmen are right because they're Englishmen, and the English beliefs are the English beliefs,
right?
And the French beliefs are.
But I think the English beliefs are because they're English.
Yes.
I don't think they're English because of English beliefs.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. But anyway, so they have that history. So both Canada and America are huge. They also have very big populations. Even though people say Canada isn't a big population, it's the 60th in the world. But for land mass, it's quite small. Dispersion. But anyways, Canada, we have the history, though, of the French and the English because they both exist within our lands. And so we have an internal conflict, which the French and the English conflict is so old that they're like Magneto and Xavier. Where they're friends at this point because of their conflict. But that's sort of in Canada. Maybe some points there's still the French terrorism, English terrorism against the French, although I've never heard about that. But it has this history. In America, they first fought off the English to get their independence. And then they had a fundamental disagreement of beliefs, which was the Civil War. And it was a big conflict. And even though the war ended... a side lost and a side won, and they respected each other. But still they had the disagreement, even though one side won, one side lost. There's still that resentment, and it's a big country, and you let everyone who lived. And as I said, it's a big place with, the third largest population? and you have states the size of countries in Europe.
Yeah.
And these states have wild differences from each other. Like a Texan and a Floridian are going to be quite different, and a Californian and a New Yorker are going to be quite different.
Yeah.
And I'm not super well versed in America, but everyone feels like they're expert about America because its culture is so powerful, it hits everyone.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, they're almost different countries, and they're just under the system and laws of America. And so a new fundamental disagreement has formed in America about abortion rights, and like that, it's been growing and growing over time, and it's reached a head, it seems like, of huge disagreements. But this fundamental conflict is the conflict between the Germans and the French, of this history of hatred. However, Americans and Canadians, to an extent, don't have this history. Like, I mean, they have the Civil War, but we don't have this. These are our enemies.
What's the hatred of abortion?
Well, one side wants to have abortion. The other.
Right, but what's the historical history of?
Well, I'm saying they don't really have, like, this is a new conflict that's come to a head.
Right.
But they haven't, like, they had the Civil War, which was, what, 200 years ago?
I don't know. It was like 1800s something.
Yeah. And so they have this new conflict, fundamental disbeliefs. And these internal disbeliefs happens, again, with, like, Protestants versus Catholics and those things. But America, I mean, they might have it a bit with Mexico, but even then, Mexico's their allies of the understanding of this history of nations. Like, there's so much, because like you're saying, of the French fighting the Germans before with Napoleon, and then they have that history of nationalisms, and then the Germans attacking the French, and then the French wanting everything they can get out of Germany, and then the Germans attacking France again, and then France wanting everything they can get out of Germany.
Yeah.
And that history goes back even further before Napoleon of the two fighting, and there's this ancient history there. And then it's like, how, like, oh, these people went to war because they wanted to take over the world. Like, I hear that a lot. Like, he's a maniacal person who wants to take over the world. And even with Germany, they just wanted France and that area to, like...
Well, they wanted Germany.
They wanted Germany, but...
They attacked France because France would protect the Germans.
Yeah, they asked England to stay out of it. Because they were ready to fight England, but they didn't want to.
But Blitzkrieg was preemptive attack on France. They weren't there to conquer France. They just knew that they didn't want to get stuck in another trench war with France.
Yeah.
So they said, we'll get rid of France, and then we can do what we want with the rest of Europe.
And then it sort of spiraled out of control with the Russians and all that.
Because they figured France would be their biggest challenge.
And they also took over Poland and those places, which wasn't within their right.
Well, parts of Poland were taken from them after World War One, I think it was. Yeah. I think Poland was formed by World War One.
Because last night I was thinking about this. So you have a country. And, like, we think about the most old medieval things, and we both played Crusader Kings, we both played Europa Universalis. And I was thinking about, so, like, this king's ass court, and this duke says, we should go to war with these people, because they took our lands from how long ago, and we want to take it back. And the king goes, well, we originally took those lands from them. This is not a war we can really fight to win. We're not really justified in it. And I know that you aren't interested, like, this is a very wise king, let's say. I know that you are not interested in this casus belli. Like, it's not a proper casus belli. You just want more land. However, this other duke has a casus belli against this kingdom here, who they stole his lands when our country was at a time of weakness. And so, we'll ask this country that this land you took is not rightfully yours. Return it to us, or we'll have to settle it in the way of war.
Yeah.
And then this duke will get back the land that's rightfully his. But to satisfy you and to have your armies and your support with us, because I know you want more land, the duke next to you will shrink some of his land that's next to yours and give it to you. And then the duke who's gained this casus belli properly will shrink some of his land and give it to that duke. So basically, those two don't really lose their land. And the guy who wants a war for more land gets what he wants. To extent even, and it's a justified war to do it, so it keeps them happy because, like, you don't even need that, but just there's this casus belli, these justified wars, and that's like, no war is justified, and then all wars trying to justify the first war, the first murder, all that thought. But I was thinking about the casus belli, since, like, some people want more land for more land's sake. Others want it because there's an injustice in the past. And I think it's far more common for the justice of the past and then taking it too far because the Roman Empire. The Romans wanted to secure their borders.
Yeah.
And what was the best way to secure their borders? Take over everything.
Just take everything, yeah. I think I know why France was pissed off. I was thinking about it. Bismarck.
Yeah.
He took a lot of France and he humiliated them.
Yeah.
So I can see why they wanted to get revenge.
And so, yeah, that's... Bismarck humiliated them. He took what was theirs.
Like, I think he was still alive even during World War One, so, yeah.
Yeah. Well, he got fired during World War One, and that kind of made a mess. Or a little bit before World War One. Like, you fired the only guy who could run his system.
Yeah. Well, like, he's responsible for World War One in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So.
Do you think he could have prevented it, though? Or made it less impactful?
He wanted it to be a thing. Like, he wanted the potential for World War One to exist.
Yeah.
Because his idea was that I'll create a web of alliances so complex that for one country to invade Germany, or another neighboring country, will require all countries in Europe to go to war.
Yeah.
And no one would ever risk it.
However, he did not account for the absolute hatred between...
The Serbs and the Austrians.
Yes.
Hitler blames the Habsburgs for World War One. He says it was their... he also blames the Serbs. He's very racist. He doesn't get into it at the start of the book, but he doesn't like anyone but Germans.
Yeah. Yeah, the Serbs were some of the people in Germany who were prosecuted.
Yeah, I think he blames the Serbs and the Austrians for World War One, which, I mean, fair enough, but
yeah, that's interesting.
So you know what's terrifying though?
Otto von Bismarck, brilliant, right? He made the system alliance. He made it so if anyone went to war, everyone had to go to war.
And it
very
worked.
Smart man, and it would hurt.
No, it worked.
Yeah, it worked. But the thing he didn't account for, like his preventive system, was human nature.
So I think Bismarck might have been able to develop a system where World War One wouldn't happen.
Yeah, well, my thoughts is if he had been fired, if he'd been in charge of things, so the assassination happens, and they tried to justify, I think, of a man of presence and nature that he was, to be able to convince everyone to sign up to these alliances, he probably could have had those two countries come to terms to not go into all-out war with each other.
I was thinking you could go back a little bit further, and he never makes that web of alliances in the first place.
Yeah.
Because he knows it'll lead to World War One. But then France conquers Germany because Germany's not protected. So I think it would have, in order to secure Germany, I think he had to do what he had to do, probably.
Yeah. No, I think he just needed to be there to keep managing it, and he wasn't.
He was such a mess, I don't know if anyone could have done it. Like, I don't know if Napoleon could have done it.
Well, there's a whole study of trying to figure out what Bismarck was up to and how he did what he did. Like, when we talked about geniuses, like, he was one of those geniuses. Like,
But he had the one area, as far as I'm aware. Like, some of these people, we were talking about, like...
But, so he had the one area. However, he managed to make it so the French and the English had an alliance.
Well,
how do you do that without, like, one of them conceding a lot? Because that's the only time they have to, like, concede, but he convinced them.
And,
the joke, but also the actual kind of dislike for each other of the French and the English goes ridiculously deep. So even though as a joke, I think I told you about this, but in the car show of, not Top Gear, but Grand Tour, they did this whole sketch on French cars and driving in French. And they also built a trebuchet at the beginning of it. And so they loaded a French car into a trebuchet at the very end and launched over the cliffs of Dover towards France to prove how much that French cars suck. It's sort of like an up yours to France. And then they had this clip of them drop, like they had to attach it to a helicopter, but it was some farm in France. And they dropped another model of that car onto that farm and destroyed it. Sort of like, oh, the car actually went all the way to France and hit them.
What was I thinking with Bismarck? The history goes infinitely deep.
Yeah.
And so if you act out of revenge, then there's always going to be deeper revenge. Like the common one is Israel and Palestine today, but everyone has those. Yeah. It's just theirs is more fresh because Israel's a very new country. Mm-hmm. Again. It was Bismarck. Could he have prevented World War One? How'd he do it all? Oh, yes. So Bismarck thought he would stop war in Europe by creating a system, mutually assured destruction, a system
Yeah.
so terrifying that nobody would ever declare war. It does make you kind of worried about the whole nuclear war, doesn't it?
Well,
Like,
his nuclear assured destruction wasn't mutually, though, because one side won. So now the judgment is you have to look at that and say, can one side win with nuclear weapons? See, I had this thought about nuclear weapons. So, it's a common thing that the technology militarily that a country has, like, they hide it from their own people, they try to hide it from the enemy. Some of it leaks, some of it doesn't. But like these hypersonic missiles, right?
yeah.
So, better way of deploying missiles, and you could attach a warhead to that, that'd be scary. Now, we've made bigger bombs, we've made bigger weapons. But a nuclear weapon is something you want to advertise. It is. Like, if you drop the first one, it's a surprise, so no one else has it. But once you have it, it's basically, yeah, I'm going to blow you up. And then both sides have it. It's like, all right, we both have it, so we're not going to use them. You want to understand, because if you attack a country without it and we don't have this nuclear umbrella, then it's like, yeah, I'll just bomb you unless you surrender. But we have this sort of guaranteed of, oh, if I bomb this person without them, then this bigger guy with them will bomb it. So you want everyone to know you have nuclear weapons. Even if you say, I don't have as many as I do, you still want to know you have a few in the pocket. The thing you don't want people to know.
So you have a defense?
Yes.
Wouldn't you, though?
Well,
Like, that was the space race. That was the point of the space
Yeah.
race, was America saying we can control
so-
space.
It's a mix. So we do have these defenses. We have SAMs, we have these boats that are designed. So we have things that can take out about 80% of nuclear weapons.
Maybe.
Maybe. Like, that's the hope.
Yeah.
And we know about them, so we have this deterrent, so it gives us hope. However, in a sort of ultimate game of chicken, right? So, two super powerful countries, both with nuclear weapons, and they're staring each other down. And one of them just loses. It's like, all right, I'm just going to fire these at you. And then they're going to destroy your country. And we'll play off the perception of that one Russian guy in the submarine.
Yeah.
Who didn't fire the missiles, even though he got on this order.
Yeah.
That hero.
Yeah.
So it's like, we're going to fire these missiles. They're going to, with our new supersonic technology, they're going to hit before they expect. Maybe they'll fire them back, maybe they won't, because it's just so devastating. So you fire the missiles at their power. And every single missile is stopped. And it's like, I can't believe you just went and did that. Well, too bad for you, because I can stop it all. Now then, surrender absolutely, because I know you don't have the same defense I do.
But what if you just said, we can stop all your missiles, therefore let's not...
Well, we can stop all your missiles. So, if you say we can stop all your missiles, because you have the hypersonic missile, so you have a fast way of deploying it, right? But if you let someone know that you have a wall...
Oh, then they can find a way around it.
Yes.
Right. So you're not 100% confident in your method.
Yeah.
You don't want them to come up with countermeasures.
Yeah. It's a sort of... So you have the justification, because their missiles come, you stop all their nukes, and then you're totally justified in taking them out in whatever means you want. You have the ultimate cause belli against them for whatever.
Of course, that could be wishful thinking.
Yes, that is...
There may exist... I'd call it even likely that there is no defense. Yeah. But, on the other hand, this is the arrogance thing again.
I'm saying this is my wishful thinking.
Yeah.
Is that this exists. On both sides. They're both hiding. This is my...
Yeah.
Because in Ender's Game, after they've done the war with the aliens, the giant Earth Alliance defense is a satellite in space, which is its own nation, basically. It's a space station. And it tells the people of Earth, all right, the war with the aliens is over. Back to business as normal. However, our job is to ensure humanity survives. So you can fight all your wars all you like. However, if any country attempts to use nuclear weapons, we'll disarm those weapons because we can, because we're far more advanced than all of you, because you put all your resources into us. So we'll stop those weapons.
And we have 1,000 Napoleons under our control.
Yes, and we will annihilate your country.
Yeah.
That was their guarantee, that space station.
Their worst soldier is one of the greatest generals in history.
Yeah.
Like, they have the brains, they have the brawn.
They have the technology, they have everything.
I'm surprised Orson Scott Card didn't do this, where they never told Earth the war was over. Because the story of Ender's Game, if you remember at the very start, was World War III was happening when the aliens invaded.
Yeah.
And...
Well, I think it could be potentially, because if you go to Shadow of the Hegemon and all those things, they had faith in both Bean and Peter. And because a lot of those super generals went back to their respective countries and took them over as their superior generals.
Yeah.
And I think the Space Corporation is kind of twisted in that humanity will survive. Now let's see which kid is the smartest. And it turned out to be Bean and Peter.
Well, everyone knew it was Bean, I think.
Yeah. But it also turned out... But Bean couldn't lead. So it had to be Peter. Yeah.
Yeah. But the...
But I hope for those systems of, like, we are hiding the defenses. Rather than we're hiding the super bunkers that make it so very few are fine and everyone else is screwed.
Well, those little Tic Tac UFOs that the Navy doesn't know what they are. Hopefully those are military assets.
Yeah, well, or there's the other things.
Or a weird species of bird.
So, you, the what's that book where the aliens are observing Earth to see if they'll kill themselves in nuclear apocalypse?
Far Side of Evil.
Yeah, Far Side of Evil. So I don't remember Far Side of Evil, but there's this concept of, so you have the planet, right? And you kind of have, but you have aliens in the universe as well. And they're monitoring everything, but the universe is big, there's a lot of stacks, hard to see things. And then you see two flashes of energy, or several, because they're doing the nuclear tests as well, but you see the two flashes of energy, let's be poetic, with the bombing of Japan.
Yeah.
So,
and several thousand more in quick succession.
Yes. Well, but you see, like, the testing... You see
America has nuked American soil more than any country on Earth.
So you see these flashes of energy. And so it's like, okay, we got one. And so you fly your spaceship over, and you sort of have a prime directive of we do not interfere. However, we do not interfere unless they're idiots. And then we only stop their idiocy. And so there's just basically aliens...
Do you know about...
With infinite patience... Or not even infinite patience, but they're just watching and like, oh, no, you can't do that.
Are you aware of the political philosophy of Posadism?
Poseidon will stop...
No, Posad.
What's that?
Is a guy. So the idea is that you want to accelerate towards a nuclear war. Because then aliens will come down as humanitarian aid to help pick up the ashes, thereby launching humanity forward into the future.
See... I think that's terrible, because I'd rather that we don't need their aid, and they'd rather that we don't need their aid. It'd be nice to have this sort of secret safety blanket that's like, no, bad terrarium, you're not going to pollute your drinking water. Okay, we're just going to clean that up. All right, continue on.
So you know how in Okami, when you defeat Jirachi, after all this build-up, you finally defeat Jirachi.
And that releases all his evil that he's containing?
Yeah, but also you realize that was about 10% of the game.
Yeah.
Or in Breath of the Wild, you leave the Great Plateau and you realize it's a tiny portion of the map.
Yeah.
Or in Link to the Past, you defeat the sorcerer, the evil sorcerer who's locked up the castle. You defeat him, and he sends you to the Shadow Realm. So you gather the 3 amulets and you defeat the evil sorcerer.
Batu.
And he sends you to the Shadow Realm. And then you have to save the 7 sages.
Yeah. And
you realize, wait, I'm not even like halfway done the game.
Mm-hmm.
Those are great moments in games because it's like, wow, there's so much more here than I ever thought.
Yeah.
Does that apply to the alien safety blanket? And it's like, it's better if you don't know about it?
I think it is.
Because then you become lazy.
Yeah. Well, it's so...
It applies to heaven as well, obviously.
Yeah, well, it's faith and belief. So the things like, how do you know you haven't seen it? And I feel like in some ways seeing an angel, like there's thought you see an angel and you become a believer. But in other ways, seeing an angel is like seeing the killer in a horror movie. It's no longer scary. Like that ruins the horror movie sometimes, is when you see how terrible the costume is.
I've seen an angel and I'm still an atheist, so I'm not even sure how convincing anything is.
Yeah. So, or even that, you're like, so...
Like, it's really interesting, the difference between people, right? Like, guy I know, friend of mine, his mom was in a car accident, I think before he was born, and it was like 1 in a million that she survived.
Yeah.
Like, the car wrapped completely around a telephone pole, and there was like stuff fell on it, and it was like every single position...
It caught fire and then a lightning bolt hit.
Yeah. Every single position she could have been in, except one, would have killed her, essentially. Yeah. But she was in that exact position, and she lived. And that very strongly influenced her faith and reaffirmed it. I think she was already religious, but she's like, yeah, I'm a believer, absolutely. That story is enough for him to be an absolute believer, or at least it was at one point. I don't know anymore. So that was something that happened to his mom that was had enough of impact for him to think, yeah, I believe. I have seen an angel and I don't believe. I'm not saying that makes me better or different. It's just, it's a difference. I'm sure you could take some people, march them up through the pearly gates to the throne of God, and they'd be like, am I hallucinating? I mean, I might do that, to be fair. But yeah, it is interesting that the degree of convincing. And that's where faith comes in always, I think.
Yeah.
Where you could be standing in front of the throne of God and still have a massive faith that he's there. And you're like, I could be hallucinating, but I still believe God exists.
Well, it's funny. So I was watching a show with a bunch of atheists. And it's relevant to other atheists.
The show wasn't about atheists?
No. The show is called Alone. And the concept of Alone, the very first season, they expanded out because it's probably not, but... So you know what Survivor Man is, right? I've told you about... Les Strauss goes out in the wilderness and films himself surviving. He has no camera crew, he's all by himself. So in Alone, 10 participants are taken. Each participant gets clothing and a pack of clothing.
Participant?
Per person in the 10 participants.
Yes, okay.
So each one of them gets the clothing, basic clothing for several changes of clothes. And then they choose 10 items to bring with them. Then they're dropped off on the northwest side of Vancouver Island in the wilderness, separated away from each other. The last one to take his emergency call for help button and say, take me out of here, gets $500,000. And they film themselves.
Really?
And they have a bear banger and they have a flare.
Really?
Yes, and then every single week a doctor shows up and makes sure that they're not dying.
Huh.
And...
Vancouver, that sounds easy.
Well, it's the west coast of northern Vancouver.
But, don't they have, clams and stuff?
Yeah, they have those things. It's also, full of bears and wolves and cougars.
Right.
And that's... A lot of people leave because there are, bears outside their camp. But a bunch of people start slowly going insane because it's I thought it'd be easy, but I'm just so alone. And that's why they even called it Alone. It's they filmed it, that's the thing that just was in these people's hearts, is how alone they were. And then this one guy's... he's filming himself. And he's like, I'm thinking about my family and how much I miss them. And it's making me really think I just love them. I want to be with them. Is this worth it? I should be with my family. My little girl's going to have her birthday soon. And I'm sitting out here and it's so beautiful out here. And then I saw the sunrise and just felt the love of God. And other people are a lot of the people who have lasted for 2 or 3 weeks start getting intensely religious because I think a lot of them were already Christian to some point. And another guy had native spiritualism beliefs. But while they're super alone, they get intensely introspective and very, very religious. And the atheists I was watching with were laughing about how these people are turning super religious and they're having religious epiphanies while being out and alone and having this experience. And there's the whole concept born again, you do get saved and something. They're saying with that person's mom, it reaffirms the belief for a born again Christian. That whole thing. I thought it was weird, though, that they're joking about it. Well, that's not important there. It's just, these people have these experiences out there which affect them in that way, being alone.
Yeah. So it's only a couple of weeks, or, they don't last for years or something? Or?
The longest a guy lasted was over 6 months.
It'd be fun. They don't tell someone if they've won.
They do that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they want to see how long they last.
So it's a gamble when you quit.
Yes.
Right. So it's not about how long you can last. It's outlasting everyone else.
Yeah. Yeah, no, they do that to several people. And one guy was trying to build a cabin, but he kind of screwed up, and so he did it. Instead, he built a boat.
Those guys that were in Japan for 40 years on their own.
Yeah. In the islands, the Japanese guys.
Yeah.
The one guy who's doing the best seems to love it out there, even though he's going quietly farming. He has a super positive attitude. He's very confident in himself. He's very competent. And so every once in a while he has a crack in his sanity from his filming.
If you have a daughter or something you were saying, that,
yeah,
you probably shouldn't be doing that for...
Yeah, well, one of the guys my little girl's going to be born soon. It's what are you doing?
Yeah. I mean, maybe you go for a week or two just to see if that's enough to...
Well, one of the guys who quit really early, I'm so grateful I quit early because I got to have this experience. I got to go out there and then I get to go home. So I get to participate in this. I get to see the beauty of the world where barely any humans are, and then I go home.
Yeah. Yes, maybe go for a little bit. But you go for is there an average that people are aiming for? Like, if I make
Well,
it,
some people set their own personal goals.
but like now that the show's been out for a while, is there like a rule of thumb? Like, you make it 4 weeks and you've probably won or something, or
You make it's months. Like the average of the winners is months.
okay,
It's like seasons change.
yeah.
Like half a year is expectation.
Well, yeah, I thought it'd be like half a year to like 2 years
Yeah.
even, but
Yeah, those are expectations. Like the people who leave early very quickly, and then the remainers hang on.
right.
So, and of course, this is the first season, so probably that's people watch the first season, see how other people messed up, and so and they also change locations. So the majority is in British Columbia, but still, I want to see other seasons and more of it to see if more people get their religious epiphanies out there, but also because it's very interesting. Like
If they die, like the other contestants die, does that count against their time, or
I don't think anyone's died doing it.
and are you allowed to kill the other contestants?
Well, so you have to get to a checkpoint to check in. But I was thinking, like, if I was in that, they're all in the sort of relatively close area, I would try to find some of the other contestants.
There might be rules about that.
Yeah.
But also, yeah, like if there's a checkpoint, you have to check in, right?
Yeah.
You just like tie up a guy with some water before the check-in and then disqualify him, or you mislead the trail.
Usually on alone, you are alone. But this time, you are hunted.
Or like there's a guy, right? It's been 4 weeks. He's going a little barmy. He's sitting by his fire. It's the middle of the night. You sneak up on his camp and you're just like, Daryl, remember me, Daryl.
Well, what happened, one of the things that was very funny is, so there's this guy who is terrified of wolves. Like, he's scared of dogs, scared of wolves. And so he's like, I'm really scared of dogs. Wolves are my biggest problem here. Like, bears, I'm fine with. Cougars, I'm fine with. Wolves, I have the problem with. Another guy who I think was directly across from, like, a different island than him, because they're, like, on islands, was having a lark and howling like a wolf at night. And he had, like, a really good wolf call. And we were talking about, like, did this one guy get freaked out by the other guy's howling, and that's why he went home, because he just heard it too much? Like, no, I can't deal with these wolves' howls anymore.
Can you like scatter rotten meat in the other guy's camp? This seems like a really bad show idea. I mean,
Yes, it is.
it seems like real. I'm not saying the idea of surviving in the wilderness is bad, but the moment you put money on the line, like that's
They might have rules about not going near other people.
right. But if you could, there's people that are going to try to cheat. Like,
Well, they also set up game cameras around where the people's camps are.
like you get an atlatl and you chuck a fish into the middle of the guy's camp, lure some bears over.
Have a friend give you a supply top-up.
Yeah, like a drone delivery. Yeah, yeah. Like $500,000's a lot of money.
Yeah.
I could, although I don't know, it's part of the fun. It's like for a while, Taskmaster. It was all about how you could avoid the task.
Mm-hmm. And how best to abuse it, and so they had to keep wording it better and better and better, and then they had to deal with Rod. Like Rod is, after the season with Rod and Taskmaster, their wording got so much more precise with their tasks, and so they have like the built-in loopholes, but like the Rod loopholes.
So how many like assassinations until Alone changes its rules?
Well, it's been out for a long time. It's like over 10 seasons.
Oh, okay. So they've been doing it for a while and they haven't gotten shut down.
Yeah. Probably have a lot of insurance. And you probably actually get pretty good pay just for even being a participant.
Well, for sure. I'm just thinking ethically, it seems like a weird show idea in some ways.
A lot of game shows are ethically weird. Like, The Biggest Loser. Pretty good ethically in some ways. But you think about it. We're looking for the biggest fatties, and then we're going to make them torture themselves to see which one loses the most weight.
Sorry, you're 20 pounds under qualifying for our show, which is for $1 million. Well, then I'll eat myself until I get...
It actually... Biggest Loser has
When
interest.
someone's asleep, you pour chicken broth down their mouth.
Biggest Loser, you do have to be overweight to qualify to go in. However, if you go in and you're already low weight, it's like, well, you've lost 10 pounds. Good job, you're healthy. But Bertha over there, who's like 600 pounds, she loses 20 pounds in the first week. She's lost more weight than you. You're disqualified.
Right.
Because the person who loses the least weight is disqualified. And if the person who loses 20 pounds then's healthy does that in the first week, it's like, oh, well, okay then, I'm not the biggest loser.
Yeah, that's kind of weird.
So you want to go in being ridiculously overweight and then lose all that weight. So it's basically laughing at people suffering.
This man puts cement in his opponent's socks to make their weigh-ins.
Ugh.
All right, well,
You said the cement thing, and you remind me of a swamp in America drained recently, and they found buckets with ropes and concrete and cement blocks with chains at the bottom.
Weird.
Yeah.
What's that about?
It looks a lot like the mafia throwing people in, and then...
Wouldn't there be bones, or...?
Why you throw people into a swamp is everything disappears in a swamp, but concrete and plastic doesn't.
Right, but wouldn't like bone embedded in the concrete or something, or
If it's
would there be a cast of a
maybe
foot?
they're tied to it or something. It's just pictures that are like
Right.
kind of creepy if you think about them, but it might be nothing.
It could be like mooring for boats, or
There are things in Florida swamps that do unspeakable things to living things' bodies, including the bones.
yeah.
Then I do not doubt that there are more things that completely annihilate dead things in those swamps.
Right, but if the concrete's there would be
Yeah.
like a foot cast or something, right?
Yeah, maybe.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Using my Dunning-Kruger skills here, I think that it's pretty clear that what's going on is it's a mooring for blimps.
Yeah.
All right, I think I'm gonna have to wrap it up there because a little rough today. All right. Let's not keep that part in.